Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Venkat Pillai. I'm the CEO and founder of CloudFrame. And today we're going to talk about the topic, what's the cure for COBOL? Okay, does COBOL need a cure? I think that's the big question. I mean, does it really need a cure? And why is that we think you have to worry about it? So let me start with my background. I've been a long time mainframer, worked as a hardcore DBA, MVS systems programmers, and done tons of application development in COBOL, in CICS, DB2, vSAM, all kind of applications. I really started out more on the academic side, where we did a lot of algorithms. That's how my interest, my fascination with the language started, mostly Fortran, C. And then I never thought I would ever be a COBOL programmer until I came into the business world and look at the COBOL language. Actually, it was fascinating. I mean, it is surprising to say that it's simple, it's English-like, it runs well. It was pretty mature back then, it's pretty mature right now. So the question comes back to, why would anybody care? And why do you think COBOL needs a cure? So that's what we're going to go through some of the topic today. We talk about the problems, and then we will talk about where do you think you need and what CloudFrame can do for it, and all other details regarding the modernization effort. So if you take a look at the organizations, some organization starts to worry that what's going to happen in my organization. What about all the people who are subject matter expert, who are either moved out into the next role, they have become now a leader in the organization, they're no longer programming, or the people have just retired, or they're going to retire in the next 5-10 years or whatever time frame. So there's obviously going to be a resource shortage at some point of time, because the number of people that are coming into the market and the number of people that are getting out of the COBOL programming business, the ratio is reversed. It's not the same anymore. There is no more new COBOL resources being taught in the school. But when I was working for a large bank a couple of years ago, and the similar question came up, I became an enterprise architect. I was doing some of their cloud adoption, latest and greatest technology, emerging technology, and I was also in charge of legacy modernization. So people started saying, why do you have to worry about it? You can get more people. There are universities that still teach COBOL. Why don't we go higher from there? What about offshoring? Why not we can get people from offshore? There is a huge number of resources, young resources. They are ready to learn. But when we started digging down deep into it, we realized actually it was not that simple. So we looked at IBM's website and we said, okay, how many universities are still teaching COBOL? We went to them, and it turns out that a lot of them have stopped running the program. And even if they run it in a very optional manner. We did go to a couple of universities. We found one university where they were still teaching the courses. We went there and we found there were 200 people showed up for the interview, which was pretty amazing. We were thrilled. And it turns out that the people didn't come there because we wanted to hire a COBOL programmer. They came there because we were a big company and we were the first time to go to the university. Only reason we never went to that university. The reason we went there is because we really, really wanted COBOL programmers. And in the end, it turns out that there were only 5 people who opted for that optional course. We said, you know what, let's hire anybody. And out of those 5, only 2 joined the interns program at the end. So that's the story. And later I found out that university also stopped running that program. So that's the state. Generally, it's becoming really harder for the companies to find. And I'm telling you from my own experience, because I have been there on the other side of the equation. And also I've seen the people from the offshore. So you do get a lot of offshore programmers who can do mainframe COBOL development. But what I have seen is generally they would like to jump into the newer technology. That is their preference. And they are here, they are doing it, but that's not their first preference. That means you see people who are less enthusiastic about it. And there are a couple of other problems we're going to talk about it down the line. So let's talk about the cost and what's wrong with the cost and why do we bring up the cost factor here. So what is happening is the mainframe processing is getting expensive, not because the mainframe itself is expensive, it's just because the mainframe licensing is based on the capacity. And it's just an old model. There's still a lot of vendors, they still do charge based on the capacity. And the capacity only keeps going up because the volume on the mainframe transactions are going up and up and up in most of the organization. So that means when you run your COBOL workload, it's not zip eligible, and all those workload do cost you money. And that's how the cost of the processing is, the MIPS and MLC charges on the mainframes are going up. IBM has done a great job by introducing zip engines, asking the vendors and OEM providers to move more and more workload into the zip. But at the end of the day, your COBOL workload is still not zip eligible. Then there are other risk factors. So what's happening is, as the industry moves, big businesses are finding the small startup companies are more nimble and they are innovating faster. So for example, I come from financial industry and I look at it and I say, we have a big brokerage house, big banks, big financial institutions, but then you have a newcomer, Robinhood, for example, and they come up and they start eating your lunch. So now all these big organizations are trying to find out that how do we improve our efficiency? How do we innovate more? And then look at their portfolio. And you have a huge amount of portfolio that's running on the back end, on the mainframe, running on a COBOL programs. Now, the problem is, if you take a look at your COBOL program, there are a couple of other limitations. For example, COBOL arrays are limited in size. There are other different type of limitation, and we'll talk about it in a minute. Eventually, this all adds up to the risk. And when I talk about the disruption in the business, I'm not talking about the disruption due to the mainframe itself. I mean, mainframe is a reliable platform. It does the job great. IBM has done a great job. They have put in tons of resources and a huge amount of investment in there. And they continue to upgrade. They continue to upgrade the hardware, the software, and everything. But the disruption I'm talking about is more from a business point of view. Like from the point of view of what's going to happen, the people who are maintaining it. I'm talking about from the point of view of the technical debt that's getting accumulated. And let's go talk more about some of it. So if you go take a look a little bit, I'm going to go a little more technical here and start talking about some of the things. So if you take a look at COBOL program, I have umpteen number of organizations we went to, and people who were there who were maintaining the system were very proud. They says, we were very strict. We have a really rigorous process. We have our COBOL programs well defined. Every one of the programs follow the standards, and nearly 100% of the cases we found that they do have programs, and not just a small percent, but a decent number of percentage that were written over the period of time. They have problems. They have problem in terms of, not following the standards, people using backward go-tos all over the place, jumping back and forth. And I'll come back in a minute on why that has happened over the period of time, right? They have next sentence that goes somewhere down the line is just extremely hard for anybody who's a newcomer. You talk about offshore resources, or talk about somebody who's coming and looking this program for the first time to figure out what the hell is happening here. And you find all kind of things, the complexity in the COBOL program, which would have never have happened 15 years ago when people were following strict standards. But over the period of time, things have really gotten out of hand. You have excessive go-tos, backward go-tos, like I talked about next sentence. You have nested occurs depending on, I have seen excessive use of redefinitions, the external variables where the definitions are different all across the programs, reference modification, misuse of memory, where people have, organizations are so fed up, they just coded their compiler option to no SSR because they were getting so many events. So all these things adds up, and eventually you have a problem. And that's the problem we are talking about in the business disruption. So we do bring in new resources, but they really don't know the reason why some things were done the way they were done, why array sizes were different. There is a confusing data types. You have all kind of numeric data types like comp 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zone decimal. They don't know why somebody used a certain data type, why they are using a new data type now when they maintain the program. There are decimal calculation problems, like when you compile your program, you have tons of compiler option that can change the way your roundings are done, to change the way your arrays are handled, change the way your events are occurring. And nobody knows the reason why they were done back in those days. And there was definitely a good reason why they were done. So one example of when people are trying to move away and they're seeing the calculation difference on the mainframe are different than your calculation running on a different platform. So the formula that's available on the mainframe, especially the decimal calculations, and depending on how complex your calculations are, the flooring and the rounding, the rules on the mainframes are different. And not everybody knows how the mainframe flooring and rounding is done. You're going to go to a Java programmer who's doing a similar rules, doing a similar calculation outside. You're going to find calculation differences there. So we talk about diseases. Sounds a little strong word, disease is, but the reason we talk in terms of cure, and that's why we brought the word disease. So you have a lost knowledge, you have skills and precision shortened, you have mission critical application you're running, and slowly you're losing your institutional memory and why things were done the way they were done. People were very proud of what they did back in those days. They knew why they were done. They were following certain standards, and that standards have become loose over the period of time. And it's not the same rigor and practice that was done back in old days. So what's the problem, right? One problem I have seen in most organizations is think about the whisper game. So you say, the first person says something to the second person, and by the time it goes out to the third, fourth, or the fifth person, the meaning of it has changed. And that's what happened with your COBOL programmer. Originally, when somebody wrote a COBOL program, that programmer is not in your organization anymore, might have retired or might have been promoted as a manager. The next person who maintained it is now gone, and your COBOL code is now in the 10th generation, 20th generation, 30th generation, 35th generation. You don't know. So by the time you look at your code, you really don't know why certain things were done in the original version of it. So what you do is you don't change, you don't fix the problem. If you have a new requirement, you simply either commit it out, you bypass it, you create a new version of it, you create more and more and more. And now you have a huge monolithic COBOL program that originally you started out as a beautiful program, but it's no longer a beautiful program anymore. It has become a liability. And that's one of the problems we notice in most organizations. So we talked about a lot of things. You talked about technical debt. We talked about resources. We talked about the things, because the new development on the mainframe is not truly the way they were done back in those days. It's mostly a maintenance and enhancement on top of what's already existing. And that adds up to huge challenges for you. So that's where the risk comes in. That's where cost comes in. So what's the benefit, right? Many people think that, is it really worth it? Like, for example, there are organizations recently, 2 days from now, believe it or not, COBOL 4.2 will no longer be supported. IBM announced end of support for COBOL 4.2. And everybody had to move to COBOL 6. So you would think moving from COBOL to COBOL should have been simple. So believe it or not, when you moved from COBOL 3 to 4, people complain about the difficulty moving from COBOL 3 to COBOL 4. When people moved from COBOL 4 to COBOL 5, the difficulty just went up. And then eventually people said, you know what, I'm just going to bypass, move to 5. I'm going to go COBOL 4 to COBOL 6 directly. The difficulty level was 20x in general. So just imagine moving from COBOL 4 to COBOL 6 is so difficult. How are you going to modernize your system if you're going to move it from one language to a completely different language? Or why not just rewrite this COBOL program, right? So, but you're not really solving a problem by rewriting COBOL program to another COBOL version of the program. I don't know how much technical debt you can eliminate. I don't know whether you're going to solve your cost problem. You're still going to run under the same general purpose processor. And what's really the benefit? So that's where a lot of these questions come into picture, where people say, what are the elements of my cure? People have tried different ways of doing it, but they are really worried. Is the cure worse than the disease? So for example, there are people who converted COBOL to Java, and they realized the quality of the Java code was so bad. It was a Java that looked like a COBOL. So it was neither Java nor COBOL, and you couldn't maintain it. You would have been better off maintaining in the COBOL itself. So it really doesn't make sense to go from COBOL to a JOBOL or a one-to-one translation of your COBOL to a different language. It's really not solving the problem. And that's not the cure you're looking for. You're better off staying where you are if that's the answer. So what you have to do as part of this is you see the quality of the code that gets generated. If you're ever going to think of moving away from COBOL and moving into a different language, modernizing your system altogether, you have to worry about the quality. You have to worry about automation. Why automation? I mean, think about it. You have millions and millions and millions of lines of COBOL code. And if I have seen architects who get excited, super excited, they said, I'm going to do a greenfield development. I'm going to take the whole thing, rewrite the whole system, because this is the way it should be done. We're going to do it with a new business requirement. But they totally forget that these requirements have been coming for the last 30, 40 years, and some of it doesn't need to be reinvented. So if you do a greenfield invention, your greenfield development, you're going to find it's going to take years and years and years. And by the time your business requirement has changed, and no business will ever fund your project. So that's one of the reasons why people are not committing it to it. They're really worried about the risk of doing all these things. That's why automation becomes so much important. And what's also important, people forget to do, is you got to think of your modernization as an incremental modernization. It took you 30, 40, 50 years to come here. You're not going to modernize your mainframe system just in 6 months or a year. It's going to take time. So you got to modernize it. And when I say modernization, I'm not talking about modernization means get away from mainframe. I mean, I have seen organizations that are willing to invest effort modernizing on the mainframe ZOS system itself, because it's a pretty good hardware. It has a pretty recent and decent software behind it. There are problems in terms of how do you support it, but if they have a good support structure, it might be a good first place to start with modernization. But where really everybody wants to go is to the cloud. So let's talk about the commitment to the action, right? So why is people not committing? Some people really know that we have to take some action. We want to move away from our system with a lot of technical debt into a system where we're going to have more modernized system, eliminate our technical debt and all the good advantages that we want to take. But just like I talked about, is everybody's worried about the risk. Am I doing the right thing? If I migrate my system, do I do a greenfield development? Then the risk is, oh God, I got billions and millions of lines of code. Can I really do it in the time frame I'm looking for? Can I really tell our business with a straight face that, yes, it's going to take me 15 years to modernize my portfolio? And that's not going to fly. So that's one reason why people are not doing anything. The second reason is people looking at all the vendors out here and saying, if I just rehost it, is it really going to help me? Is the converted code going to be maintainable? And if it's not, why not just leave it on the mainframe? It's running, it's a reliable platform. Why not stay there? And that's one of the few reasons why people who want to take an action, but they don't want to because of the risk. And on the other hand, there are some people who still think that, it's a good enough platform. It's been running, just leave it there. They're just afraid to do anything. But I think the time has come that people should really start thinking about it, especially with the incremental modernization. It's worth putting that first step, moving away and start thinking about modernizing your system, start eliminating your technical debt, because it's going to give you a lot of business value. It's going to make your business more agile. It's going to make it grow faster. And we'll show you what we can do in terms of CloudFrame, right? So the next thing you have to worry about is the quality, because if you're going to move to a different language, different system, different environment, and if you don't have the quality that you're looking for, you're actually losing the benefit that you had with your mature system, and you're going into an immature system with more technical debt and more problems. You're getting into the vendor lock-in, you're getting into the bad code that cannot be maintained. Even though you have a resource shortage, at least the COBOL is a simple English-like language. It's still maintainable. You can still maintain it. Somebody can look at it and figure it out. But if you're going to convert it to a JOBOL, it becomes even more harder. That's why your quality is important. So if you look at the cloud native, you talk about the application that are born in today's world. They're born on the cloud. So when something is born on the cloud, they're thinking completely differently. Is the mainframe is shared all system. And in the cloud, when they go in, you have zillions of servers. You want a capacity that can grow horizontally. Mainframe, you can upgrade vertically, and cloud, you can upgrade either vertically or horizontally. So it gives you a lot of options. But the moment you start thinking about upgrading your systems or improving your system or putting more capacity, horizontal capacity, that means your code is going to run all over the place. Some of it might run in different servers, different data centers, different geolocations. So you got to make sure that you should have no hardcore dependencies. And that's where comes the 12-factor app principle, which gives you a very simple 12 guidelines that how your app should be. When you design your app for the cloud, make sure it's designed based on those 12 factors, which will allow you to scale horizontally. It will be flexible, extendable, simple, can scale on the cloud. And that's very important. So when you start moving away into the new system and modernizing, you start thinking cloud native, because that's where the world is going to go, and that's where you want to be. It takes some time, but it's worth it. It's worth the effort doing that, thinking in those terms. So where CloudFrame will bring value for you is a few ways. Firstly, it's going to give you a quality of the code that's important to you when you go. It's going to give you a cloud native application when you convert from your legacy COBOL to Java. And your converted code is going to be well architected, is going to be pattern-based conversion, because so far people have done conversions, they're a line-by-line based conversion. It's very important to think of pattern-based conversion, because that's where you're going to get the value and the quality you're looking when you move into the new world. And it also becomes important that you leverage the automation. So unless you have the automation, you're not going to put a factory line approach. You're not going to put 10,000 people and say, here is a tool, and we put 10,000 people who are going to run through this factory approach, and eventually you're going to come back with a modernized system. What I've seen is most of this modernization effort, they go beyond the timeline. They exceed their timeline. And in the end, when the conversion is done, they find it very hard to validate the results. The automation becomes very important. And this is where we are very proud that we can provide 100% automation. And we can also allow you to guarantee the precision that you had on the mainframe. The calculation, the rules that were done on the mainframe is preserved in your new system. So it just lowers your resource dependency. The automation is really important, just because you have so much of stuff on the mainframe and you want to modernize it and you really want to see light at the end of the tunnel. This gives you the scalability. And the new concept that we use in CloudFrame is incremental modernization, because so far everybody was thinking that there is a magic bullet, there is a silver bullet. You can go out there, you can somehow magically run the tools, bring in a factory approach, put in people, and you can get out of the mainframe and you have a beautiful modern system. Hasn't really happened. People have been trying for the last 20, 25 years. People have been saying that mainframe is going to die. It hasn't died, and it will not. These are the reasons, because the expectations is not set correctly. So when you do your modernization, you've got to make sure that you do it in an incremental approach. You have a well-defined scope, clear success criteria, shorter project duration. It just reduces your risk. It also helps you with your budget, because if you're going to go to your business with a massive budget, you're going to find it really difficult to get your project approved. And this is one of the big advantages of using CloudFrame, because CloudFrame will allow you to do an incremental modernization, give you a full backward compatibility, even allows you to run your modern processes like Java on the mainframe itself. And there is an advantage of running. You might ask, why would I modernize my system and still run on the mainframe? Well, there is an advantage, because IBM has put a substantial amount of effort making sure Java has good hardware support, good software support, and on top of it, there is a reward. The Java is 100% zip eligible, and zip is an engine on the mainframe which is drastically cheaper than your general purpose processor. So it is a big advantage for the customer to leverage that engine, but the only way you can leverage, you as a customer, you have no lever. Only the OEM partners and vendors can go to IBM and ask permission to run on the zip. But when you run things on the Java, you have this ability to take your workload 100% zip eligible. So there is an advantage of running on the mainframe, and another advantage is your data gravity. You have a huge amount of data on the mainframe, and you're going to do an incremental modernization. You're not going to move your data out of mainframe. It's going to take you some time. There's going to be a network latency. There's going to be a lot of copying back and forth data out of mainframe, in and out of mainframe. What it does is it duplicates your data. And then soon people forget, where is my golden copy of the data? They start updating data on the distributed side, and then it becomes a total mess. So if you're looking for an incremental modernization, this is a really good strategy to start out. Maybe start out on the mainframe. You prove that Java works. The Java that CloudFrame generates is cloud native. If it works on the mainframe, it's going to work anywhere. It's going to work on Red Hat. It's going to work on AWS. It's going to work on Azure. It's going to work on Linux. It's going to work on Windows. And then you start thinking about your strategy for data, because your data, you have a lot of dependency. As I talked about, different type of data types. You have episodic data types. You have packed decimal data types. It makes it really hard for you to take this data and move it to a different platform, and then you still do a certification with your business to show that you are able to process all the business reports and the functionalities are carried over exactly the way they have been expecting for last 30 years. Because if it's not, doesn't matter who's right and who's wrong, they're going to say it's different and it's not right, because it will create a problem in their business world. So we give you a modernization approach where you can take things off. And if you would like to stay on the mainframe, take advantage, you can do that. If you like to move away into the cloud, you have a beautiful opportunity where you can do it in an incremental way. And we have the customers in all spectrum where they are using this terminology of incremental modernization. It works out really well for them. So once again, coming back to the Cure for COBOL. Once I'm recapping what we have talked about is, I think time is now that there should be a commitment to the action. Do it in an incremental way. It's a good start. Start somewhere, because if you're going to look for a perfect solution, you're not going to find one. Look for the quality of the code, look for the quality of the strategy, look for automation, and look for incremental modernization. Thanks, everyone.